We have a very special apparition coming down the hall. I think our apparition is a little shy. Picking some last minute bows and buttons. Oh my
Loyal was caught with his pants down. The cops raided his hotel. He wasn't there when it happened. He was at his private retreat on Mount St. Helens. He had no phone on the mountain. A lawyer brought in the news. The newspapers had a field day. What they said outright was not pretty. What they didn't say but implied was even uglier. It was Puritans and Royalists all over again. The Puritans clamored for ouster. Had they, after all, not succeeded in driving Dicey and her harlots out? Surely if the regency of bartered cock in pussy could be deposed, the dethroning of the monarchy that dare not speak its name would be such a piece of cake as to let the zealots have it, and to eat it, too. The bloodthirsty throngs of Peccadillo Circus called for the head of this monarch on a pike. But this was no king. Charles I was long since kaput. Cromwell, as well, had long since been chucked. A glorious revolution called the Beatles was turning Britain inside out. The times were changing. And this time out, the murderous mob had taken on a sovereignty that doesn't play by the common rule. This was a majesty dicier than thou. You don't mess around with loyal Whacker the Fourth. Cocksucker. Nor does one mess around with a mob. At least no common one does, or would dare. The masses are in it for life and death. They got something to lose, something to protect. Safety. The raison d'etre of the mob is to feel safe. Indeed, the only way to whip the masses into a mob is to threaten their feeling of safety. Safety is the belief that you exist. The belief that you are somebody. That somebody woke up this morning. That somebody will wake up tomorrow. Safety is a lie. You do not exist. However, you are silly and think you do. And you are very serious about it. Silly and serious. Silly, serious you live for safety. You hold your safety in your bowels with your breakfast on the turn to shit. Your greatest fear is that your bowel will one day remember that you don't exist and will undulate away, slithering on its belly like the snake it is. And you and your silly existence will slither away with it. This mortal coil, from some fruit in Eden to Mishima in sepulchre, is a drug state. A drug state of being. A state of being that reassures you you exist. You could not hold on to this belief. You could not hold safety in your bowels were it not for civilization. You remember that dream you had? Oh, but you do. You do remember. It was that dream that you exist. That dream you had way back before you did. It's been a long time, I know, but just close your eyes and remember. There. That's better. Now you remember, don't you? You remember what an interesting diversion it was to feel that you exist. especially since you didn't. It was kind of fun in a way. Like any good drug, it gave you an interesting high. And after the drug dream was over, you wanted it back just one more time, remember? But you couldn't get it back, no matter how hard you tried, and you did try. Oh, how you tried. So next time you had a coffee klatch with the girls, there weren't any men then. Men came later with existence. You told them about it, and lo and behold, each of them had had the very same dream. Remember how startled you all were? Your all having had the same dream meant that it must not have been a fluke. The drug must have some commonality, or better yet, availability. How you chattered on and on about it, so excited. You compared notes on the feeling itself and speculated on what life would be like if you could be high like that all the time. And lo and behold, you worked yourselves into such a state of excitement that the dream came back right there, right then, right along with the buzz of your morning coffee. Remember what an incredible shock it was. There you all were, sitting around the table at Madge's, and suddenly all of you, to a man, thought that you existed. You looked at each other and blinked. Not only did each of you think you individually existed, you thought you all of you together, existed. This was one motherfucking drug. So you all went away to think about it, remember? But once you were away from each other, each of you found that the feeling slithered right out of your bowels. Reality set in again, and the dream that anybody and everybody exists was gone. So you all rushed back to tell each other. And lo and behold, not only had you all experienced the same slithering away of the dream, but once you were all back at Madge's, the feeling came back. Well, bright boys that you are, you stayed right there and haven't left. You figured that the drug is inside you. You figured out that you could all get it back and keep it, so long as you all hung out together and held on to your bowels for dear life. So here you are today, your assholes still as tight as ever, still hanging on to your safety, still hanging out with Madge. What a party, big-time kegger, an orgy of belief. You've been dreaming together for a long time, and I admit, you done good. Why, y'all are so good at enchanting each other that civilized folk can wander off alone and still stay high. Why, it's gotten to the point that the hardest thing you can do is to remember that you don't exist. You're so used to the high that you think it's normal. Fortunately, you've got bowels. Now, you can hold your bowels and you can ride your bowels, but you can't tell your bowels what to do. Those little suckers will puff up like balloons and embarrass you in front of all your friends. They keep tweaking you to remember that you don't exist. And they act up. Between constipation and the runs, between polyps and poop. Between colonic irrigation and colon cancer falls the shadow. The shadow of queens. Queens who make love with your butthole, reminding your bowel to slither away and leave you sober. Queens who remind you that you don't exist. Between the fools of Shakespeare and Injun clowns falls the tweak of assholes like Loyal Whacker. That's why you hated him, because you were afraid. There you go, now you remember. You remember how shocking it was to learn about Never Never Land. What, after all, do those people do? You remember that he showed you how he loved you, how he rolled you over, except for those of you whose legs he threw into the air, and how he remembered you across the fucked line, the line on the other side of which you don't exist anymore. You remember how you lost yourself, how your bowel went, and might have crawled away. But you screwed your sphincter into a knot and held the motherfucker in for dear life. And you wanted to kill that fucking queen. Her head on a pike was too fucking good for her. Burning at the stake didn't guarantee enough pain. Indeed, murder in any form wouldn't do. The only good queen is a dead queen, and Loyal Whacker is better than just about anybody. Being dead is how a queen gets her majesty. She gets it because the snake has crawled halfway out her butthole and she half remembers she doesn't exist. That's where the phrase half-assed comes from. But her snake is too far out there for some no-count and no-ass to hurt her with the things that scare you shitless, like death. No, the way to stick it to a half-assed queen is to get her to suck the snake back into her gut. Get her drunk like you. Get her thinking somebody exists out there, that we all ain't dead. Get her good and drunk on that dream, and you got her. Got her where you want her. Got her where she, like you, has got something to lose. That was your plan for Loyal. That was your weapon in the duel to the death. You knew his secret. You knew that if you could civilize the snake back into the bowel of the queen, you could mete out terror to make murder pale. You stopped at nothing. You knew his secret for all his vitality, his indomitability, for all his rage. Sweetness was the heart of his queerness, his queeniness. He was a little boy in love with fun. When he tweaked, it was to play. The fun he made was clean. Yes, he was undulant. Yes, he fucked around. But never did he fuck over. You went for the heart. You knew how tender he was there, frankly, how sappy. Your plan was to take his heart hostage, you and your thugs. You and the Anunnaki, gods of the underworld, judges of the dead. You thought that you, on the authority of your existence, on the integrity of your awareness of yourself, could kidnap the poor boy's heart. And there, cornered and gagged, you planned to tell his heart of the horrors of the underworld, of the bitchery of a rescue god. Your plan was to pin the heart of La Tante till she cried uncle. Your plan was to get her to her belly through her heart. Get her to shore up the mortal coil. Get her to pull the serpent back into the belly of propriety. Adam squared off with Eve. Eve rose on her toes, on point, and graced you with a dazzling turn. Admitting to no wrong, admitting to no charge, she called a press conference. A man of loyal whackers standing, no, a man of his money. Could pack in the press even without a sex scandal to entice. The newsboys were stacked to the rafters. Master of scenes, Loyal, was late. But his tardiness was not blunt. It, like everything else about him, articulated something. In this case, it set the stage. He wanted the crowd antsy. Once he made his entrance, he wanted them in the palm of his hand, snuggled into his stigma, oiled by his spit. Loyal knew how to warm the mob, how to milk the masses. The place was crawling with prep people and shills. His first stooge was one of his lawyers, credible for his three-piece stripes. He droned a nasalized recounting of Loyal's reputed offenses. Lurid legal detail followed lurid legal detail. So subtly did this lawyer's bored manner mask his real mission, that not a press person there realized that they were juicing slightly in the private parts. Salient and salacious features recounted, but not recanted. A shill leapt to her feet in full fairy fury, shrieking at the top of her lungs about her God-given right and hormonal imperative to suck cock. The wispy little thing threw herself all afluff at the stodgy lawyer and attempted to rip his throat out with her pink patinades. More shills stormed the dais in rescue. Boos and hisses erupted from the crowd. The room was a din. Chaos reigned, but then, at the very second lawyer and wispy little thing were yanked apart, the back doors burst open, trumpets blaring fanfare from hunky balletic boys in red coats, white tights, and codpieces to die for. Suddenly, pumping pump for all it's worth, Elizabeth I floated into the chamber in unalloyed majesty. Awe hushed the room. Her Majesty the Queen, eyes steady, straight ahead, face infinitely unflappable, cast a spell to bind even shills in the know, in fealty forever. Toward the front she strode. However, just before reaching the dais, she regally seated herself in a simple chair at the fore of the masses, as though she was one of them. A stunned silence all round. Why did she not go all the way? Why did she not mount the dais? Was this not loyal whacker himself in high-born drag come to affront the press? Was this not the very vortex of theatrical cross-currents? Was it not the pinnacle of high dudgeon queenery giving the finger to moral rectitude? No, it was not. This was but a casual acquaintance of Never Never Land dropping in between appointments. The real loyal whacker, cued by the hush of wonder this grande dame left in her wake, humbly stepped through a door at the front and to one side, looking more like Mahatma Gandhi than Elizabeth anybody. His head was shaved, his aspect holy. He carried with him a Buddhist meditative calm. Buddhist more than anything else was how he looked. Buddhist monk. It was a drag familiar to the press at that time because of the number of Southeast Asian monks, their images blazing in memory, who had lately been dousing themselves with gasoline and igniting themselves in protest in the thoroughfares of Vietnam. Only Loyal knew that beneath his saffron robe he sported a jockstrap. He mounted the dais, he stood, he took command. His shoulders square, his spine tall, he spoke with tutelary gentleness. The chamber was utterly still, the press consummately attentive. His prep people had turned the trick. He announced that his hotel would henceforth be a Buddhist monastery and a home for retired swamis. He renamed it the De Milo Arms. To underscore his point, he ushered in the first resident of the hotel, or the home for retired swamis, an emaciated ancient who looked to have been born about the same time as the Buddha. Freshly flown in from India, the old ascetic was so intensely into samadhi that he probably didn't know where he geographically even was. As the old one quietly collapsed into full lotus, Loyal initiated a chant of Om Mani Padme Hum among his shills. The girls got into it. Soon the press conference was rocking with fairies in high cosmic oral drag, intoning the syllables in the motliest of queenie ways. Here Hindu, here Buddhist, there Gregorian. With all the gusto of Baptist black. Vibration throbbed, syllables pulsed, oceanic flooded space. One could almost see colors with the sounds, and all without benefit of LSD. Thus ended the press conference. Straggling out, the press people blinked into sunshine, at a loss. At a loss as to what exactly had happened here. At a loss as to its newsworthy features. At a loss even as to whether in a print medium this was front page, society, fashion, or sports. There was some consensus that this was Salvador Dali Twilight Zone. But in terms of reporting this story to the public, well, you had to have been there. Conveying these goings-on to Mr. and Mrs. Sixpack in the burbs just wasn't going to compute. What's the headline after all? Press hears music of the queers? No, better to leave the six-packs in the dark, holding their beer with their safety in their bowels. Not a peep from any news media. Trump by the Queen in spades. Seattle never troubled Loyal again. It was hands-off city. Charges were dropped, scandal withered. Even as he made good his threat to shelter superannuated swamis, Seattle just let it. Even as he institutionalized his Buddhist monastery, even though his monks were actually fags in saffron drag, even though they were called by the citizenry the Saffron Menace, Seattle, municipally and separate self by separate self, budded out. Loyal had no taste for triumph. He may have trumped, but he didn't win. He didn't have the heart to win or to lose. The very concept of win and lose was, well, nothing to him now. His many years of playing the extremes, of pushing the polarities, left him panting now, weary, too tuckered out of spirit to reach for either pole. It was easier now just to suspend, to hang out in the nowhere of in-between. He no longer had a taste for society as a medium for art. All of humanity seemed to him now a medium only for mediocrity. Even art itself was nothing. The planet still intrigued him. The Earth was more compelling than he had ever remembered. Sensation, the feel of his flesh, was his friend. He savored flavors on the chew and pleasured himself in the undulant ripples of his gut. He left town, off to Mount St. Helens, where he cloistered himself in his lodge. And there, all by himself, he rode the cycles of his person and the planet. The symmetrical peak of the graceful mountain spoke to him. He stared at it for hours every day, even when it was shrouded in gray. The rest of the rip-snorting 60s, surely a decade made, if ever one was, for the likes of Loyal, peaked and fell without his further contribution, or even notice. Nor did the nuts and bolts of his business affairs exactly rivet him. The electric bill, debates on whether to stick with incandescence or switch to fluorescent light, even the brilliant colloquies of the Demilo monks as they explored Buddhism historically, culturally, and sometimes even spiritually, all these things were nada, nada to Loyal. So he got out of the biz and turned the Demilo arms over to the monks in the form of a not-for-profit corporation officially titled the Budoid Boys, listed as such even on the IRS papers. The Budoid Boys saw their corporation as his child, themselves as his children, though they, along with just about everything else, were frankly nothing to him. But he was everything to them. They tried to burn bright like Loyal, to catch his eye, to earn his respect, his love. But his love was like the sun now. It shone wherever, on whomever, indifferent, no distinctions. The Budoid Boys were queens, to be sure. Queens in committee, with all the bitchery and drama that queens in committee can create. A true luminary like Loyal requires absolutism and artistic tyranny to shine. The boys, like any committee, cast a pretty pale flame. Though their drag was brilliant, though their drag, like their corporate identity, came from Loyal. Saffron and shaved, the Budoid Boys were always jarring to passers-by in the streets, even if only dashing into some apothecary to purchase salve for their hemorrhoids. The boys did do some good works. However, during the Christian holidays at the Nadir of the Sun, they put on giant feeds downtown for the hungry and the homeless. Every Thanksgiving and Christmas, they fed the 5,000 on turkey and fixins, long lines snaking around the block to get in. Now, please know the boys were not stupid. They didn't for a moment think that 2 meals a year make any dent in intractable problems like hunger, isolation, or despair. No, these feeds were more theater than social work, though they did have a positive PR effect on certain church auxiliaries composed of blue-haired ladies who, as a rule, adore perpetrating good works at the holidays. The downtowners themselves, frankly, appreciated the gesture and decided the boys weren't so bad for queers. But the boys' gesture was just that, a splashy scene to underscore hypocrisy and injustice. The boys loved to point out hypocrisy and injustice. They especially loved it when it was fraught with irony on every side. So, of course, as the Vietnam War escalated, the Budoid Boys were right there, of course, as protesters. Stopping short of self-immolation, protesting seemed the Buddhist thing to do. Of course, their protest pissed everybody off. Rednecks hated them for themselves because they were fags, and because fags could get deferments from military service, which rednecks couldn't. Liberals were pretty iffy about them, too. The liberals didn't like them because the rednecks already thought that liberals were fags. And the liberals didn't want to give the rednecks any propaganda fuel. The liberals also didn't like them because fags could get deferments from military service, which liberals couldn't. And frankly, most of the liberals during the 60s were still hedging on whether Hitler had been right about queers. Only begrudgingly did the liberals, most of them white males, let the boys participate in anti-war educationals, rallies, and leafletings. The white male liberal leaders made no secret of their belief that the boys' special circumstances, vis-a-vis just about everybody, meant that the monks of the Demilo Arms would do better to do their own thing. So they did. One evening at rush hour, mustering all among their number, along with as many wino loyalists as they could bribe with the promise of a bottle, the boys formed a giant conga line through downtown. They congaed to the Armed Services Recruitment Headquarters and circled it. Then, at the top of their lungs, they belted out, "Onward, Buddhist soldiers, out of Vietnam." Of course, every redneck inside the building or happening by was incensed. Who, after all, do those yellow pinko pansies think they are? And every liberal white male happening by was humiliated to see them. What, after all, are the rednecks going to think about liberal white males who protest the war when these yellow pansies are out there doing it? A group of black teenagers on their way home from high school happened upon the demonstration and stopped to assess this odd situation. Once they realized that these protesters were the infamous Budoid boys, fags in saffron drag. The black kids were inspired to beat yellow pansy white butt. The kids fell on the boys in their wino alleys, kicking and punching. To the absolute shock of the black kids, the yellow pansies fought back. It was a battle. Rednecks inside the building and out were simply amazed to see pansies fighting like roller derby queens. But the rednecks were also thrilled that what had been a mere queer protest only moments before was suddenly a golden opportunity to crack black skulls. The rednecks joined right in. For the longest time, liberal white males crowded around, trying to decide what to do. Finally, they joined in the fracas, but only after their position was well thought out. They went in to save innocent black kids and to break as many rednecks as they could before the cops arrived. But to a man, the liberals were ambivalent about the boys. On the one side, they were fighting as comrades with the yellow pansies against the rednecks. On the other side, they threw a few punches against the pansies just to let the black kids know whose side they were really on, and to make sure that no redneck would have any justification from this battle to accuse any liberal white male of being a pansy too. The cops, once they got there, didn't know what to do. Cops, as you know, are no friends of fags, black teenagers, or liberal white males. Frankly, had the rednecks been winning, the cops would probably have left well enough alone. But to the utter disbelief of everybody, it was the fags in yellow monk drag who were clearly on top. This one did hit the papers, though in a garbled form. Its newspaper recension had no skeleton to hang on and hence flopped like jelly. Its one accurate detail was that the cops had a devil of a time pulling the battlers apart. It said nothing about who was winning at the time. In fact, it said next to nothing altogether. The press didn't want to report that a bunch of fags were protesting the Vietnam War and were then set upon by a bunch of homophobic black kids who themselves were set upon by a bunch of homophobic racist right-wingers who in turn were set upon by homophobic lefty good guys in white. Instead, the newspaper just said that a group of Buddhist monks were singing hymns at the Armed Services Recruitment Headquarters when, for no apparent reason, 3 waves of rowdies threw themselves gratuitously into the fray. To the reader, it all sounded like Polynesian virgins casting themselves into the volcano to appease the gods. The outcome of the newspaper rendition was a total non sequitur. It gave the impression that the whole mess ended in a yellow ring of butter around the building. The street version of the story, spread by word of mouth, was more accurate. Its bottom line was, yellow they ain't. Along with, you can send these boys to do a man's job. Yeah. The story's street version was also of more consequence. It resulted in the spreading of a subversive rumor around Seattle. Maybe pansies are real men too. In the aftermath of the internecine battle at Armed Services Recruitment Headquarters, the Budoid boys did indeed decide to take on a man's job, discussing, in committee of course, what Loyal Whacker would do under these circumstances. The boys figured that Loyal would turn the other cheek. Loyal, still incommunicado on his mountain, was not available to ask. But the committee designated to determine what his thinking would be really didn't want his opinion anyway. They were sure not only that he would turn the other cheek, they were even sure how he would do it. Loyal, they decided, would turn the other cheek by setting up support services to aid returning Vietnam vets in their adjustment back to American society. For 3 reasons, it was the obvious thing to do. It would implicitly support bringing the troops home from Vietnam. It would offer visible outreach to the lackey dogs of the military-industrial complex, who were actually both the big-time criminals in the war and its ultimate victims. And most importantly, nobody else, not even the VA, was doing it yet. Despite their Buddhist accoutrements, the fundamental religious value of the boys was, at all times and at any cost, to be trendier than thou. Even in turning the other cheek, chic was the bottom line. In this case, however, DeMilo chic was just too radical. In the eyes of the guys coming back from Nam, the sight of fags in Buddhist monk drag was not exactly a homecoming. Frankly, the offer of aid and succor from the boys of the DeMilo Arms looked to the boys coming back from Vietnam more like the shooting of moons than the turning of anything. Voting with their feet, Vietnam vets turned tail on the services of the Budoid boys. Not one vet, not even a single closet fairy, wanted anything to do with our boys in the Denny Regrave. Noses went out of joint all round at the DeMilo Arms in one grand huff, tense in tone, withering in intent, and perfect in execution. The paragraphs placed just so on stationery printed specifically for news releases. A Queenie Harumph was the official response from the Budoid boys regarding the no response from Vietnam vets. The services of the DeMilo Arms were withdrawn. The regrade Buddhists just took their balls and went home to play. Sulking like celluloid heroines, they backed right out of further participation in causes in the community till further notice. Their politics collapsed to the TV room of the DeMilo Arms. The TV room of the DeMilo Arms was where they all were in April of 1975, when South Vietnam collapsed. After all their years working for the U.S. pullout from Southeast Asia, here it was, happening before their very eyes on TV. The TV room was crammed with silent, spellbound gawkers. Outside, it was a beautiful spring morning in Seattle. The tulips were almost spent. The rhododendron were peaking. But the Budoid boys were all indoors, camped out in the TV room of their tribe. The drapes drawn, the shimmering TV playing across the darkened room like a flickering campfire. The nobodies of the world love to kick the giant's ass. I certainly did. How thrilling to watch Goliath fall. The shocked look on his face when I beamed him right between the eyes right before he collapsed, how it pleasured me. I was just some kid, some schmuck from the hills, a professional watcher of sheep. But I was no sheep. I faced the giant, sauntered right up to the big lout. I didn't even have any armor on, though Saul tried to give me some. My only weapon was a sling and the smooth stone that knocked the son of a bitch cold. David's the name, murder's the game. Samuel, after all, had already anointed me king to be. To be king is to murder. Everything's got its price. Every price has got its currency. Kingship comes at the cost of murder in the currency of blood. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. But you were different, Jonathan. You operated in a different currency. Yeah, you murdered. You carved up your share of Philistines and whatnots. You racked up a hefty load of foreskins. Hell, murder was big business back then, just like today. But your heart wasn't in it, like mine was. You weren't ambitious, like I was. Your heart was elsewhere. You gave your heart to me. You had the stuff of kings. Saul, your father, was king, the first king over all the tribes of Israel. Upon Saul, your father, the power of kingship descended from the gods, and then to me. But you, Jonathan, were more than king. You trafficked in a different blood. You trafficked in my heart. You loved me like nobody else, and I loved you. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. The shame of your mother's nakedness notwithstanding, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman, you chose me, David, the son of Jesse, as your queen. And not you. Your father went nuts. He was crazed with shame, but then everybody was fucking crazy back then. It was rampant craziness that sucked us all into the king biz in the first place. It was all madness. The people were beside themselves with their craze. They were drunk on the insane notion that they existed. They whacked out for fear they would lose it, would lose their existence now that they had it. So to try to exist safely, they decided they needed a king, a shepherd into whose keeping they could give their silly existence and thereby keep it safe. Let's make the world safe for sheep, they cried. I mean, hell, it was Saturday night and the poor little lambs wanted to boogie. So they needed a bouncer to keep the wolves away. Can't blame them for that. And like I said, I ain't no sheep. I was cut out for the job. Of course, the king gig didn't get off the ground right away. I don't know who was the bigger fool, that damn God we Israelites had concocted for ourselves or that damn Sam. We let be honcho holy man. What a mess. I guess we were right for a king. Hell, all the other tribes were getting kings. Why, kingship was just raining down from the gods. But Jonathan, no offense to your lineage or anything, but let's face it, doll, your dad Saul was a bozo. Spineless went for days. No, I don't know who he paid off or who he slept with to get the job. But for some reason, beyond my ability to comprehend, that God of ours told old Sam to anoint him. Better to have rubbed him out. I should have rubbed him out. Fuck, twice I could have. Why, once Saul and I were doing Ring Around the Rosie, it was just a matter of time till one of us got murdered. So easily I could have killed him. That one time that he went into that cave to take a dump, that cave where I just happened to be hiding. I had him then, but all I did was hack off a chunk of his skirt to wag in his face later. And then that other time when I crept right into his camp while he slept, there he lay, his spear stuck in the ground just above his head. I took it. Should have plunged it into his heart. But I just took it. So why didn't I kill him? Virtue, nobility, humility, that's what they all think. That the qualities that made me fit to be king kept me from it. But Jonathan, you and I know the truth. It was the qualities that made me yearn to be Jonathan's queen that kept me from murdering Jonathan's dad. Better that the Philistines do it. Though they really didn't either. All they did was defeat him. Saul took his own sword and fell on it. Better that he had done that a long time before. Then maybe the Philistines wouldn't have murdered my gentle Jonathan. Maybe then, once David was king, Jonathan could have been by his side. Yes, better that. But things are as they are. Saul was king. A botched job from the beginning. Even that God of ours, in all his omniscience, regretted it right away. So he, in all his omnipotence, sent Samuel to anoint moi behind Saul's back. Real upfront kind of God. Why, that God was a sweetheart all over the place. He then set an evil spirit on Saul's soul to torture the poor bastard. No wonder Saul flipped out. I mean, that's not paranoid. But it sure got the ball rolling. Saul, during his bouts of flip-out, needed soothing music to lay him back. So who in all the world just happened to be a musician with the harp? Or was that the lyre? And who in all the universe just happened to be sent to the king to mellow him out? I'm at your service, sire. Dave's the name, and I, your majesty, am smooth. I'm living Muzak, walking Valiant. And I have come, sire, to calm your raw nerves. By the way, just want you to know that I'm your replacement on the throne. With gods like that, who needs Hitler? At least some of the fallout was good. You, Jonathan, and me. You and me together. In each other's arms. Saul and David may have been the elements of the atomic bomb. But Jonathan and David were fusion. Like the sun. And did we burn bright, my angel? Did we make light? Oh, Jonathan. Oh, how we made love. You were the magician, Jonathan, and I was your instrument. How you made me sing. You knew secrets, secrets no king could know. And you tried to teach them to me, and when I was with you, I thought I understood. It all made sense in your arms. But when I left your embrace, the ugly world flooded back, washing your knowledge from my memory. But now I remember. I remember in particular that one night the moon was new. You and I slipped out early after dinner. It was dark. Only the stars shone and your eyes. I remember asking you, Jonathan, why do you love me so? And you told me that you had fancied me from the day I entered your father's service. But when I killed Goliath, you recognized that I was possessed of the soul of the hero. You knew I would be king, but you knew more than that, more than Saul, more than Samuel, more than that God of ours. You knew the male and the female, and you knew the little boy. And you knew that against the backdrop of the butchery of my life, I yearned for the memory, for even a hint of memory. The memory of something greater than the power of kings. You knew that I, like your father, was a drunk. We both had a taste for the power of kings. Yet you knew as well that I would suffer the little boy in me, would suffer to remember the male and the female one day, too. But only after my despair of kingship had burned away the blackness. You held me that night like a little boy. You, the son of King Saul, held the future King David in your arms, and you pitied David, and held him like a child just awakened from a nightmare. I remember you said to me, that night when the world felt so safe, so real, you said, Davy, honey, do you know who I am? And I answered, yeah, you're Jonathan, the son of King Saul. You are my friend, my brother, my lover. And you said to me, your sister, your daughter, your wife. And then you explained the male and the female. Of course, forgot it in my drunkenness until my despair remembered me to it, until my death brought me home to it. But I remember now. You explained that the body of every man possesses a secret place, a place more secret than the prostate, a place of greater joy. You said it is the womb in the man, caressed in the gut by his snaking entrails. It is the vessel of blood, the cup of life, of communion, the grail. You told me how men look for that vessel by disemboweling other men and themselves. And always, bloodied hands groping through endless intestine yields nothing. The pathway to the womb of the male is through the heart. I remember how breathless your voice was, how you quivered to say it, and how your eyes shone. You said that certain men like you and me have the capacity, much the way my fingers could unlock the lyre, to strike a resonance, to sound a tone, to hear a music that only the heart can hear. And when such men find each other, they can, if they will forget they are men and remember the womb. They can dissolve in each other's arms into the male and the female, one, across two sexes, across two bodies of one sex, across two separate souls of both sexes, all sex, before and after sex. And in the temple of their touch, in the spell of that sacred tongue, they can remember themselves and each other, back to the womb and before, back to fetal fish in the wash of ocean, back to the cells that separate us and create us, back to the one and only self. And you told me about queens. You said that when Gautama was born, there were two paths his life could take. One to be a great king, the other to be the Buddha. You looked hard into my eyes and addressed me as King David. And you said with a fierceness I never knew from anybody else before or since, David, King, if I, Jonathan, had the courage to lose my soul, my identity, myself, if I had the guts to dissolve back into the clear void from which I come, I would. But Dave, you said, tears in your eyes, in your voice, I am terrified of the night. I cling to my soul like a newly orphaned infant in its dead mother's breast. But David, how your eyes burn, Jonathan. David, you said, I tell you now, on the womb of my mother, on the womb of myself, I would not be king for all the souls of all the world. I don't have the courage to lose my soul and dissolve into a Buddha, and I do not have the taste for carnage that kingship requires. Therefore, David, you whispered so close in my ear, darling Dave, I live where the female snakes into the male, knowing too little to be delivered from this pain, knowing too much ever to forget the suffering of this knowledge. David, you said, breathless, between kingship and Buddhahood snakes the yin-yang of queens in all their glory, all their glitter, all their gore. And then you sobbed, Jonathan. In my arms you sobbed. Over and over again you choked out the words, David, King, with such tenderness that even I understood that the elements of myself and my kingship were the formula for my despair. I knew then that though I would be king, my kingship would be hell on earth. Its detail I could not then see, but the general shape lay before me like a corpse. It was no surprise to me when I did become king that my one son raped my one daughter, that another son murdered the one, that the avenging son then sought to overthrow my kingship and make himself king. He too was murdered. It was all murder, Jonathan, all of it. My reign was a reign of the blood of souls who would be king. Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s. And Jonathan, now look here, these souls who would be queen. Here in the arms of Venus in their TV room in Seattle on this shining spring morning, these little boys who would be queen. These little boys who, for all their contrary bluster, die 1,000 deaths to see your dad beat up my dad. These little would-be Buddhist boys who watch on a shimmering screen as other little boys on the other side of Pacific, at the end of ocean. As other little boys watch as Goliath falls and think they felled him. These other little boys whose dad is beating up my dad. These other little boys who fancy themselves king. It is no surprise to me, Jonathan, that my one son rapes my one daughter, that another son murders the one, that the avenging son then seeks to overthrow my kingship and make himself king. It is the would-be way. The way of would-be kings, the way of would-be Buddhists, the way of would-be queens. Unnoticed at the back of the room, standing in the doorway, Loyal Whacker surveyed his boys. He watched them as they watched their TV. They were glued to its image. So glued that though each sensed some camaraderie in the presence of the others, each experienced his personal reality as only between himself and the dancing image on the screen. None of them heard Loyal, none saw. If any of them had any wormy inkling that he had slipped in, it was ignored. Loyal Wacker was the polar opposite of the focus of their attention. Loyal stood there, remembering, the pads of his fingertips electric against the enamel-painted doorframe. And then, unnoticed, he left. Down from his mountain he had come with intent. Without TV, radio, newspaper, or magazines, he had had no word of the fall of Saigon. But he knew. He knew more than the press conveyed, more than his Budoid boys could see in the flicker of their tribal fire. Loyal walked to First and Pike, to the crossroads of the Pike Place Market. It was noon. The streets were clogged with the noontime rush. He carried a blanket, a book, and a large cloth bag, bulky with its contents. All three, the blanket, the book, and the bag, were family treasures from the last century, from the beginning of the Wacker timber dynasty of the Pacific Northwest. The bag was one that Loyal Wacker I had packed possessions in when he left Michigan. The blanket had been owned by the Indian clown who became Loyal I's wife. The book, a first edition, had been acquired with the family wealth and was very valuable. Draped in saffron Buddhist drag, Loyal Wacker IV trekked into the intersection, stopping traffic. Right at the midpoint of the cross streets, over a cover to the sewers below, he spread the blanket. He opened the book, tore out a page, and laid it on the street several feet in front of him. Horns honked angrily as he seated himself in a full lotus in the middle of the blanket and laid the book in his lap. Pedestrians jeered from the corners. Two policemen hurried toward him to clear the intersection. Swiftly, he pulled out of the cloth bag a large container. He unscrewed the small cap at the end of its spout and doused himself with gasoline. The policeman suffered minor burns. The pedestrians stopped jeering. The drivers quit honking. The only sounds that remained were the blaze and the wind. Then sirens, more cops, the fire department, medics. The body was wrapped for cartage. The book, its cover burned beyond reading, still in the grip of hands burned beyond recognition, hands that had clutched it in the last moment to the gut, perhaps in response to the pain of the flames. A fireman noticed the page blown into a gutter some ways away. For all he knew, the single scrap of paper was gratuitous litter unconnected to this strange event. Clearly, however, this paper was a page torn from a book. The fireman, even though perceptually crippled by the Seattle schools, could tell that the printing on the page was Russian. The fireman could add two and two. This page, peculiar for its Russian print, might just relate to this suicide. Peculiar, among other things, that it involved a book. Kami Pinko, the fireman thought as he slipped the page into a pocket. He hoped the page would be evidence that would help the detectives to understand what, to everybody who witnessed it, seemed incomprehensible. Why would a man, unidentified except that he was white, middle-aged, tall, slender, and dressed in saffron robes, kill himself here, in this odd way? Surely this was not one of those pseudo-Buddhist fags from downtown. They're just limp-wristed fairies. This was serious suicide. Memories of such suicides still burned in the minds of Americans who had seen in the press. Real Buddhist monks immolate themselves on the streets of Saigon. How many now, years ago? But him, a white American here in Seattle at the Pike Place Market? Who was this guy? Despite the saffron robes, how could he possibly be a Buddhist monk? And why would even a Buddhist monk die this way today, the 30th of April, 1975, even as U.S. troops were hightailing it out of Saigon? The local evening TV news carried the story. By press time, the man's identity had been learned, though the motive was still unknown. The TV stations detailed the eccentricities of old whackers all the way back to 19th century Michigan. But their focus was the majestic oddities of the newly deceased. They noted that he was the end of the whacker line. And they interviewed several of his boodoid boys who watched themselves that evening in the TV room of the DeMilo Arms. Though no one, not even his boys, attempted to explain the last whacker's motive, every TV station ended its story with the page found in a gutter. The page witnesses said had earlier been placed by the deceased in the street. The detectives had determined not only that the page came from the book held by Whacker when he died, but also that the book was a first Russian edition of Crime and Punishment and had been autographed by Dostoevsky himself. The page told the part of the story where Sonia directs Raskolnikov to go to the crossroads of the busy Haymarket in St. Petersburg and to confess to the four corners of the world that I have done murder. The page ended with Sonia's promise, then God will send you life again. The boodoid boys had the charred body cremated. They placed the ashes in an urn in the lobby of the DeMilo Arms. Above it, they hung the largest, most flamboyant of the black velvet portraits of Divina Concepcion. And they continued to do good works. The inheritors of his fortune, they didn't worry about solvency. Loyal's bankers managed the estate, a guarantee that the boodoid boys Incorporated would be around for a long time. And though they evolved, they did endure. The retired swamis went the way of the Sisters of Inanna Sophia, but the DeMilo Arms continued to flourish as a quasi-Buddhist monastery. And despite the petering out of swamis, the boodoid boys never lost sight of retirement as an ongoing theme. In bold reiteration of Loyal's early vision for the old hotel, the boys rejuvenated several floors as a home for retired queers. And this time it really took. The integrity of their operation was second to none. Unconcerned about bang for the buck, who after all had more bucks to bang with, they offered the highest quality at the lowest cost to the consumer. Even through the negative filter of homophobia, gerontologists throughout the region had to admit that the boodoid boys operated probably the best and easily the most colorful retirement home in the state. Many friends of Dorothy, more fags though than dykes, took refuge there. Protected to the end of their days, the old ones lived and died in dignity and in infinite permutations of drag as their real and fantasy selves. Eventually, the boys put the hotel back into the convent business too. The Sisters Before Jesus, also known as the Sisters BC, petitioned the DeMilo Arms for convent space. A spin-off of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, the ribald San Francisco social fraternity of men in nun-drag, the Sisters Before Jesus had a fraternal and social agenda of good works, entirely in sync with that of the boodoid boys. And as Sister Venus Flytrap, the mother interior of the Sisters BC explained, Venus is just the sort of role model I want my girls to have. The boodoid boys gave the sisters what they asked for, the 13th floor. It was a marriage made in heaven. The sisters' purple habits and the boys' saffron robes were perfect sartorial complements. Together they looked just like the University of Washington football team. But the boys of the DeMilo Arms did not limit their good works to the queer part of town. They continued their holiday feeds and became boisterous advocates for the poor and the homeless of downtown. Slowly, the city administration and even parts of the citizenry began to perceive them as more than just a joke. But their triumph in terms of consciousness came with the Denny Hill Clinic. Just before Ronnie Reagan hacked at the American social conscience with his budget axe and its jaded blade, a group of late 1970s-styled self-actualizers decided that Denny Regrade needed a community clinic. Lots of folks lived there on the streets or in low-rent buildings and had no access to medical care that was skyrocketing in costs every year. The group began to organize a board of directors for the clinic and to scout out an appropriate facility. When the Budoid boys caught wind of the plan, they immediately offered the organizers space in the DeMilo Arms. An awkward dance ensued. Now, the liberal organizers had nothing against the Budoid boys or their various causes, but the DeMilo Arms was notorious. Would street people and crotchety old folks in subsidized housing go to a clinic in the flaming DeMilo Arms? The clinic organizers feared they wouldn't, but the boys were not about to take no for an answer. They upped the ante. They offered their tower in toto, along with adjoining space on the first floor of the main building. They offered the space in perpetuity without rent. They offered to renovate the interior, Steel Clinic, and to cover all the startup costs. Frustrated by rents and hassles and dorky spaces all over the regrade, the clinic organizers were intrigued by the offer of the boys. Though still afraid they'd get burned if they chose this flaming facility, they at least were willing to look. The boys were ready. The space was spotless when the organizers arrived. Balloons and ribbons were everywhere. The boys had already hired an architect. Blueprints and drawings of 3 alternative interior plans were posted on the walls. Chic refreshments were proffered in plenty. Then the boys did their presentation. The architect oozed enthusiasm. The lawyers were ready to offer anything the organizers wanted. And the boys pointed out that the tower is separate from the main hotel, that its red brick and Victorian design contrast sharply with the tawny brick and early 20th century blandness of the hotel proper, and is hence visually distinct. It has a private entrance off the alley, and the tower is a treasure with a history, a significance, and even a magic all its own. As their pièce de résistance, the boys whipped out the results of a questionnaire their network of downtown insiders had conducted in the neighborhood. This research indicated that the regrade residents were fully aware that the DeMilo Arms flamed. But while the typical local sentiment was, I don't understand why they do what they do over there, there was minimal animosity toward the Budoid boys and even real affection. The clinic organizers signed on the bottom are the dotted line. And in accepting the gracious offer of the boys, they proved themselves to be exemplars of grace as well. They explained that, in respect for the Venus who has lost her arms, we are naming our clinic the Denny Hill Clinic, in honor of the neighborhood that has lost its hill. And on this dark December morning, in 1987, here in the waiting room of the Denny Hill Clinic, here in the tower of the once Hotel Washington, here where once there was a hill, I stand at this front desk and remember. A few precious moments to savor. It's quiet, except for the rage of the wind outside and the pelting rain against the windows. Snug here at my front desk, the waiting room encircles me in warm red brick and natural wood beams. Overhead, 100-watt bulbs light the room from hoods dotting the high ceiling. No stark fluorescence here. The Denny Hill Clinic has inherited the values of the Budoid boys. Incandescence is better for the body and the soul. The Denny Hill Clinic is clearly colored by the presence of the DeMilo Arms. Though the majority of our patients are the poor and the elderly of the neighborhood, over 50% are over 55, we also see the Budoid boys, the Sisters BC, and the DeMilo Arms retirees. Since the advent of the AIDSies, the Budoid boys have taken in more and more people with AIDS. We see them too. Our waiting room is directly connected with every floor of the DeMilo Arms by an elevator that at our level opens into a hallway just around the corner. At night, we lock the elevator off at our floor, though during the day, it's not uncommon to see some sprite in saffron or purple drag zoom through our waiting room on the way upstairs. We're a shortcut from the alley. Our clinic practices allopathic medicine in the vein of the American Medical Association. We have 2 real doctors. They fight real disease, the critters and other afflictions that attack real folks. A real laboratory in the back sleuths out the causes of empirical malaise. A real pharmacy dispenses drugs on site, though it's careful not to carry anything real fun. But real goes just so far. Our clinic is at the crossroads of the real and the surreal. Like it or not, we are on both sides of a lot of issues. We're frankly a little skitsy. Our medicine is mainstream. Our staff are all professional. Any of us could be hired by any of the giant medical centers on First Hill, if any of us had the heart. You see, from First Hill, the view is all downtown office towers and business as usual. But the view from our tower, from what's left of Denny Hill, is not usual, and is more than mainstream. From Denny Hill, you can see the change of worlds. Denny Hill Clinic has 2 community health nurses, Trudy and Kit. They fight disease as well, but on the home front. They are the mop-up soldiers who follow the practitioner generals into battle. But their charge is larger than aftercare. They, on the other hand, of the M deities almighty, endeavor to prevent disease. They teach diet, exercise, medications. Theirs is the medicine of the hot cup of tea. At home, hunkered down in their bowels, the gnarled gnomes of the downtown underground can swallow biological truth a bit better when it's sugared with a measure of simple human kindness. It's amazing what a serving of cooked carrots, a walk around the block, or 15 minutes of informed listening can do. When your life has collapsed to a rundown single-room hotel, when you're 80 and alone. Every fall, Trudy and Kit give flu shots, and every Friday morning they take blood pressures for the neighborhood for free. Today is Friday. Though it's still early, a usual blood pressure morning would be hubbobbed by now. A lot of hypertensives wear their blood pressures on their sleeves, a fetish to stroke an ID tattooed to mortality. Most Fridays, when I unlock the door, a crush of pressure people are already out there, huddling in the alley, anxious to get in to wait. But when I opened a little while ago, not a hyper soul was there. Of course, today the wind is blowing, and the moon is full. There's a medicine to the moon, or so I have come to believe, so I have come to see, from the perspective of this desk, from this tower, from this hill. The Denny Hill Clinic has a social worker, too. His name is Jack. A regular Joe, his is the medicine of a place to sleep and enough bucks to buy your insulin or that cup of cooked carrots. He advocates for the rats of America as they bumble through the maze of the Social Security Administration, the Veterans Administration, the United States Immigration Service, and on and on. All the multisyllabic, unsayable gibberish for one up, one down. His medicine is blood from turnips, milk from iron tits. Jack does what he can. Some guys get some day labor, a bag lady gets the $20,000 accrued since she qualified for a mental disability a decade ago, but which she never received because she had no address. A wild-eyed Vietnam vet goes to live with his daughter and son-in-law in another state, then tweaks out and walks here, arriving crazed at Jack's door. A retired prostitute gets medical coupons and hence surgery for her Crohn's disease. Hundreds get a few hundred doled out begrudgingly by a system that would surely rather see them die. Bags of groceries all round when the food bank is stocked, when you can find a place to put the food bank, when some landlord will tolerate those people in their long lines of pain waiting to shuffle in. The pain never seems to end. But here at the Denny Hill Clinic, we don't give up, just because it all seems futile. Hell, we even have a mental health team. A full-time master's level therapist and a psychiatrist who comes in a half day each week. Their medicine is, more than anything else, a vigil. Candles lighted for the soul. The craziness and despair in our neighborhood are so huge, so unrelenting, so intractable. Our view of mental health starts with cooked carrots and a walk around the block. If the measure of success is cure, forget it. Our mental health team doesn't succeed. If the measure of success is cure, then our mental health team is just psychic band-aids for would-be suicides and garden variety flip-out. Just referral points for the meat doctors who need solutions to prescribe, even if the prescriptions are just confessions of how powerless doctors really are. But somewhere this side of cure is simple witness, and that, I think, is what our mental health team really does. Day after day, session after session, our full-time therapist, his name is Chuck, treks into indescribable abyss. Again and again, he helps wounded souls with his insight, his intuition, his courage, his kindness, with the protection of his presence. He helps the wounded to walk into the cavernous gashes in their souls. He witnesses what no human being should ever have to know, and his innocence lost again. He treks back to the public psychosis we call society. I make it a point, after his sessions, to catch his glance as he emerges from his office. Sometimes his eyes have the wild look of someone who has made a great journey. My heart calls out to him, Orpheus, don't look back. Our psychiatrist is largely a consultant. She sees a few patients each week, evaluates their psychic functioning, and consults with the staff about medications, hospitalizations, and the like. But as I see it, from this desk, psychiatry is only part of the medicine she practices. Her real medicine is metaphor. Psychiatry is just a front for her poetry, a credible cultural access code that makes her user-friendly. In so many ways, the edge itself runs smack dab through her. She's half Chinese. Her father was a U.S. soldier during World War II. Her mother was an aristocrat, the daughter of privilege and noble lineage. Her family name was Wang. It was a scandal when they met in China during the war. The Wangs did not approve of their daughter hooking up with this American whose name was White and whose lineage was black. But over the remonstrances of Chinese propriety, Wang married White and went to America. They had one daughter, our psychiatrist, who they named Aphrodite. Aphrodite as an adult, in deference to Yang and Yin, hyphenated her parents' names and christened herself Aphrodite White Wang. She goes by Afro and mostly looks the part. Hers is the face of Africa with Asia laughing across the eyes. She's a knockout. It's hard for straight white doctors to take her seriously as a medical professional. They'd rather just fuck her and be done with it. But professional she is, though she wears psychiatry as lightly as she wears white wine. She takes us to our skitsy edge, which I guess is what you want your psychiatrist to do. Aphrodite is a nice twist on Venus, a curve to us. Her very presence demarcates where we stand, at the crossroads, at the edge of the change of worlds. Psychiatry is a stepchild of the medicine of meat. Meat medicos belong to empirical science. They want to see it, touch it, medicate it, or cut it out. What isn't quantifiable isn't real. Psychiatry is alchemy. But Afro White Wang is no stranger to meat. She can quote meat, chapter and verse. She rattles off plumbing and biochemistry with all the polysyllabic Greco-Latin shibboleths of the fraternity of meat guys. And then she moves seamlessly alchemy. Brilliant, insightful, lucid, gentle, she crosses the meat guy's eyes. Her voice is the dawn. Pastel and shining, she speaks with the authority of Chinese nobility, with the integrity of a once slave who took freedom as her life. Out of the mouth of this babe, psychiatry is not only palatable to the medicos of meat, it is an oracle. They listen to her spellbound. We all do. At the Denny Hill Clinic, even the receptionist, even I, attend consult meetings where practitioners of all the medicines share metaphors to create an art that really heals. I'm not putting down our other docs. I love the meat guys. I got my own hankering for meat. I cut them slack. And they both yearn for more than the quantifiable, for more than meets the eye. Both are white boys, both bright boys, and it shows on both counts. Yet neither started out to be a doctor. Dr. Shadow, we of course call him Tony, initially wanted to be a pharmacist. Back in the 60s, in his youth, he was religiously devoted to pharmacologically altered states of consciousness. Once on the path of orange sunshine, he got so hooked on school that he stayed until he popped out with an MD. Dr. Helm, Ted, wanted to be a clown when he grew up. But after he graduated from college, his application to clown school was rejected. His dreams dashed. He went to Harvard Medical School and became an MD by default. Neither of these guys is a narrow AMA apologist. When the clinic board of directors was wrestling with whether to include treatment alternatives on site, it was Tony who led the charge to include physical therapy, massage, chiropractic, and acupuncture within our facility, and even to rent some space upstairs to a psychic healer. Though her practice is entirely separate from ours. But he didn't want anything to do with naturopathy or homeopathy. And when she first came to us, he put Aphrodite White Wong through some paces before he accepted her as a true colleague. Like I say, we're kind of skitsy here. And Ted, our would-be clown, is an advocate of socialized medicine and a well-known activist for causes of conscience. He married a refugee from the Holocaust of Pol Pot, and eventually, personally, supported a dozen of her relatives. Ted frequently speaks at rallies against nuclear arms, participates in marches against U.S. involvement in Central America, and went to court for picketing the home of the South African consul in Seattle. He did a little jail time, too, for defacing a billboard that advertised smoking. Like I say, these guys are not the usual run of doc. But like I say, we are a little skitsy here. However much these guys may be champions of the change of worlds when compared to the arrogance of many an M-deity, they are still doctors in a culture that believes physicians can raise Lazarus from the dead. Ted and Tony are both courageous and honest men, but they both swallow hard before remembering that they, in truth, cannot perform a resurrection. Ted and Tony are both a bit embarrassed about being doctors, but then, on the other hand, they're ambivalent, too. On the surface, they're embarrassed because of privilege. They earn a lot of money, more than anybody else who works here, and vastly more than any of their patients. Of course, they earn less than the meat market will bear, less than they could at one of the medical centers on First Hill. Earning less helps them feel virtuous and hence less embarrassed. But it also pisses them off. At a deeper level, they're embarrassed for things they can't quite say but know. They know their privilege derives from fear. People are afraid to die. People have been afraid to die ever since they remembered that they exist. Fascism's just another word for something left to lose. Ted and Tony are kingpins in the ancient pyramid of fear. The common terror projects up the hierarchy to the kingpin and is experienced in the common sense as kingpinship descending. It's an old story of up and down brought to you by the membrane of the separate cell. bubble of the ego, identity on acid. An old story older than whoredom and infinitely tireder. The hour is late. History itself is near its end. History begins when the power of kings descends from the gods. History ends when kingship dies and the world changes. America is a logical extension of the power of kings. The American dream is a revolution of the ego. When history began, the old kings carried identity for the masses. At history's end, the masses take identity back. Everybody wants to be king. America is a society of new kings, kings at the end of history, little kings trafficking in mortality and little dominions of privilege. The currency of kingship is murder, now just like it was way back. You need not kill me to murder me. You murder me when you politicize me into meat. In a society where everybody would be king, everybody can't be. Kingship divides. If real political equality emerged, there would be no kings at all. The end of history is the end of kings, is the change of worlds. The world changes when the membrane that divides us dissolves, cell by cell, and meat melts back into slime. The Denny Hill Clinic stands at the membrane. Our backs are against the wall. For us who work here, the only real next step is to remember the dissolution of membrane, to remember slime. But we are kings and have an investment in meat. We need the membrane. We need its division, its articulation, cell by cell, as it rises into higher organisms, into higher divisions of self and other, into kings and have-nots. Here at the Denny Hill Clinic, we're embarrassed to be kings. From here, after all, you can see the change of worlds. Here, there are nudges to remember the future when the membrane dissolves. No one is more invested in ego than a king. No one clings to identity more fervently. Yet with kingship comes the ego strength to see through the membrane and the imperative. Ted and Tony are good men. Their hypocrisy is the taste or the test of that goodness. They are ego kings, and they know their power is fear, fear of death. And they know, however much it might look at the meat level of politics, that they are selfless soldiers ministering to the have-nots. That the truth is they are just the tip of an iceberg of fear. Their own fear they project onto their patients. They need their patients' fear. Without the fear of the have-nots, there would be no Dr. Kings. The would-be Dr. Kings would have to face their own ego fear within the jurisdiction of themselves with cleaner, cutting metaphors. And that's too frightening to countenance, especially for a king. At least for any living king. A king at the level of meat can be murdered just like any political body else. But at the level of membrane, a king can remember slime, only in regicide, and to the extent that kingship is the self, suicide. Only those dead to membrane remember the change of worlds. Only the dead can countenance a fear so dangerous. I remember these things 1,000 times, as I, like any coward, die 1,000 times. I remember these things because I was king of Uruk, famous even outside Indiana for its strong walls. It's an old story. It begins when the power of kings descended from the gods. I am a Hoosier hybrid, 2 parts God, 1 part man. My mother was the goddess Pollen, sacred to Hindus. I am not a god. I am mortal. I am a man. Though once I was a king. Through my mother, the power of kings descended from the gods to me. My name is Gilgamesh. I'm in search of the wind. And on this Friday morning, in this dark time, I reign here, at this front desk. And the wind howls. I practice reception. A white boy with a graduate degree, I'm too good to be the girl at the front desk. Hell, I'm a bona fide daughter of the American Revolution. One of my grandfathers died February 2nd, 1776 in Piscataway, New Jersey, while fighting for American freedom. Of, say the bounty papers filed later by his widow, wounds suffered to his private parts. Clearly the sins of the grandfathers are visited upon the granddaughters. I, emasculated in the popular mind of those Americans for whose freedom my grandfather gave the supreme sacrifice, am a pink nigger. I am slime, a nobody, a dead man. I deserve to be the girl at the front desk. The shadows that lurk in the alleys of downtown. Seattle's people. The people with their balls shot off. The dead are my people. I, a reputed boy, am underemployed in the market of meat. I am not professional. I ain't no kingpin. I am poor, and I receive full-time. Horror the economy, I take the flip side. I straddle the membrane. Remembering on this side meat, on that side slime. And on the meat side of things, I remember enough of slime that I ain't gonna take no shit from nobody no more, honey. My front desk is my station, the control panel of an intergalactic spaceship. I'm Captain Pilgrim Querier. I pilot the vast emptiness, seeking perspective point by point. Every patient, every person who approaches this desk is the point, the nub of a separate cosmos. The way I figure it, everybody lives on a different planet, and all anybody's got to do to travel in space is to talk to somebody else. I steer my craft into the universe face by face. I journey into the domain of identity. I call it the id entity. I traffic in people's hallucinations of themselves in point by planetary point. Space aliens confess to me the dreams of other worlds. And I confess. I confess that I was a man once. I confess I once was king. I confess to murder. I confess to meat. I confess to slime. I got me two things, personal things in my front desk. They remember me to meat. Remember me to slime. Can somebody help me get this? I need the pages. I'm told to watch out for wedges. I've never done this before. Thank you. Oh, it all falls down. I got me 2 things, personal things, in my front desk. They remember me to meet, remember me to slime. One is a picture, a photograph of me, 8 by 10, black and white, matte framed. It's hidden so patients can't see it, but the staff know. In it I am naked. In it you see my meat. People squirm to see it. Naked is dangerous stuff. And always it's the meat they look at, not the eyes. The eyes are too naked. The eyes got that pointed look, that mix of noble, sad, and raged. That look of more than anyone dare say. That look some queen flashes at the cops when they catch her in some toilet sucking off some married man from Bellevue. That's the look a queen flashes when she remembers she was a king once. Remembers she was once a man. When she glimpses through the membrane and remembers she is slime. My eyes speak slime, and my meat is saying this queen ain't gonna take no shit from nobody no more. Honey. There's a label on the picture, I put it there. Wrote it out in my own handwriting. It says, Ecce Homo. It means, behold, the man. The other personal thing I got is a card I typed up. It's part of a letter that Seattle, the chief, is said to have sent to Franklin Pierce, the president. We know that the white man does not understand our ways. One portion of the land is the same to him as the next, for he is a stranger. The earth is not his brother, but his enemy. And when he has conquered it, he moves on. He leaves his father's grave, and his children's birthright is forgotten. The sight of your cities pains the eyes of the red man. But perhaps it is because the red man is a savage and does not understand. There is no place, there is no quiet in the white man's cities, no place to hear the leaves of spring or the rustle of insects' wings. But perhaps it is because I am a savage and do not understand. The clatter only seems to insult the ears. The Indian prefers the soft sounds of the wind darting over the face of the pond, the smell of the wind itself cleansed by a midday rain. The air is precious to the red man, for all things share the same breath, the beast, the trees, the man. Like a man dying for many days, he is numb to the stench. What is man without the beasts? If all the beasts were gone, men would die from great loneliness of spirit. For whatever happens to the beasts also happens to man. All things are connected. Whatever befalls the earth befalls the sons of the earth. It matters little. Where we pass the rest of our days, they are not many. A few more hours, a few more winters, and none of the children of the great tribes that once lived on this earth, or that roamed in small bands in the woods, will be left to mourn the graves of the people once as powerful and hopeful as yours. The whites too shall pass, perhaps sooner than the other tribes. Continue to contaminate your bed, and you will one night suffocate in your own waste. When the buffalo are all slaughtered, the wild horses all tamed, the secret corners of the forest heavy with the scent of many men, and the view of the ripe hills blotted by the talking wires, where is the thicket? Gone. Where is the eagle? Gone. And what is it to say goodbye to the swift and the hunt? The end of living and the beginning of survival. We might understand if we knew what it was that the white man dreams, what he describes to his children on the long winter nights, what visions he burns into their minds so they will wish for tomorrow. But we are savages. The white man's dreams are hidden from us. Some say a white man wrote the letter. I don't know. I don't need to know. For me, the truth doesn't come down to verifying who did what. For me, the truth is a feeling. It is remembering. It is the visions burned into my mind so I can wish to remember tomorrow. It is the vision of a man watching his people die, witnessing the end of history, remembering slime. I remember slime. I remember Seattle. I remember Seattle's people. I stand here at the desk of this little nobody clinic, and I remember the tribes. Tribes that once dreamed on these shores. Red tribes murdered by the power of kings. I remember tribes that once dreamed on the shores of the North Sea. White tribes murdered by the power of kings. I remember the tribes of Israel. I remember tribes of would-be Buddhists and reputed boys. I never met Loyal Whacker, but I remember him. Sometimes at lunch I go to First and Pike and stand for a moment where he burned. Once I kissed the ground. And I remember you, Enkidu. I was king of Uruk at the strong walls. I was a great king. I lorded it over the people. I had them all. In the palm of my hand, at the tip of my sword, on the rise of my meat. My people called out to the gods to deliver them from my lordship. And the gods responded, Enkidu, in your flesh. They created you, Enkidu, created my equal. You were my only equal. You understood my heart. I loved you as only the ego of a king can love. As only a king can love an equal. We were men together, Enkidu, as I had never been a man before. We were brothers. And we remembered together the female. We did that too, I guess. We crossed together the fucked line. We began to remember across the membrane, but the gods spooked for fear that such remembering would bring an end to history itself. So the gods sent you fever. You sickened, died. I was with you when the snake uncoiled from your gut. I stayed with your body until the worm crawled out your nose. And then I fled. I fled because I remembered that I am mortal. 2 parts God doesn't cut it. My brother Enkidu died, and I shall die also. I embarked on this journey, and here I am now, still on the journey, even here, at the front desk of this little clinic in Seattle on this dark December morning. I am here to remember Enkidu, my brother, who is dead. To remember Seattle, my brother, who is dead. To remember Loyal Whacker the Fourth, my sister, who is dead. I am here to receive the medicine of slime. The medicine of slime administered by the nobodies, the dead. I am here to remember across the membrane, damn the gods. I am here to remember the end of history. I confess to kingship. My hands are stained with blood, but I have no taste for murder anymore. I confess I cling to identity for dear life. I confess I am too gutless to remember the clear void. I confess I will never remember Buddhahood. And I confess I stand at this desk between kingship and Buddhahood and receive the power of queens. as it descends in slime in me.